function calls, including scander, of course, the other things, printfs, etc., etc. Word count. So here we go. So word count. Now this is just kind of outlined a little bit. So I left some stuff off. This is now, you've done the other 3 or 4. Now you're to the point where you kind of figure out what do I need to include up there. Okay. Notably, for example, the isLine macro, that's not there. There's no, this is a common complaint when I have students implement this. They're like, what's the isLine? So I take them back 3 or 4 slides and show them. All right, so the isLine macro you have to define. So let's see how this thing works. You have to include whatever you need. There's a bunch of stuff you might need. Then it looks like you need to declare some variables as well. So declare whatever variables you need. Then it looks like you have to deal with some command line arguments as well. And then it looks like you need to open a file. All of that you should by now know how to do. And if not, you can look at the previous pieces of code to get some insight into how to do that. So the assumption when I hit the while command is that IFP is the pointer to a valid input file. All right? So someone tell me what the declaration of IFP might look like. What would the declaration of IFP look like way up here in the declarative section? Seeing as how I'm using this fgetC function on it, does anybody remember how to declare a file pointer? It's in the PDF that I gave you. Remember, it's this. It's file star IFP.
Oh, yeah.
Remember that?
Yeah.
Right? So you have to make that declaration. And then how do I open the file? Remember, if IFP equals fopen of, and then where do you suppose the command line argument? What command line argument do you think would have the name of the file? What command line argument?
Right there with the while?
So it'd be probably something like this. If IFP equal fopen, and then what command line argument do you think contains the name of the file? Question, what is argv of 0?
That's
That's the pointer?
That's the command itself. That's WDWC. So we've lost, nothing sunk in, so let me back up to command line arguments. Command line arguments. All right. Do you remember? Arg count is 4. And then what's the 0th argument? That's the name of the function itself. Then argv1 is, in this example here, argv0, argv1, argv2, argv3. All right? And then if you recall, we did, as an example, for WD echo, we said, we just counted them out. The echo command itself doesn't need to be echoed. If I say echo Umar, enter, what's going to show up? Umar, not echo Umar. So, which command line argument do I need?
This Umar.
Yeah, one and on. Everything past one and past it, correct? So I go into a little loop. Right? And there's some subtlety here dealing with whether you put a space or not. So here's another example in the opening file scenario. So here we go. What does WD touch do? Notice at line 15, what do I say? If I'm going to say touch file name, then how many C arguments are there? 2 of them, right?
Mm-hmm.
There's the touch command itself, which is argv0, and then there's the name of the file, which is argv1. Touch, file name. And so I check to see on line 15 if the argument count is not correct. Then I leave. Otherwise, the argument count is correct. And what do?
You
I
go
open
to
the file.
Yeah.
So in this case, notice that the fopen command's first
Argument.
argument is
A
argv of 1. Because what was argv of 1? The name of the file that was to be touched. Right? So if I'm doing word count, tell me how word count would look on the command line. I would go WC, then what?
The name of the file.
Some file name, right?
Right.
Some file name. Correct? I would say WC file name. Right? Now, in our case, we're using watered down word count.
Okay.
Yes? All right? Or more specifically, ./WDWC. What does this correspond to?
The compiler.
Isn't that argv0?
Okay.
Yes?
But Dr. Morris, isn't it? Aren't we asking to compile when we put that / like that?
No. This is after I've compiled.
Okay.
The compile line, you should be able to glean from, for example, on WD Touch, line 4. That's an
Okay.
example of a compile line, and they would all compile about the same way.
Okay.
All right. So, what does this one correspond to?
Arg1.
Arg v of 1. So, how many total command line arguments are there supposed to be?
2.
So when it says in this section of code, declare the necessary variables, so I'm going to need to declare a file pointer like this. What else am I going to need to declare? It looks like I've got something called CHRS. What do you suppose that is?
Characters.
Yeah.
Increment the
What
character.
data type would you expect it to be? An int.
Okay.
So int, CHARS. What else do I need? What other things am I counting?
Your words and the characters.
So I'm counting characters, words, and lines. And it looks like I'm incrementing 3 variables. Characters, words, and lines.
So you need 3 arguments?
So it looks like I need to declare not only the file, right? But I'd also need to declare int what? Chars, right?
Mm-hmm.
And then what else?
Int word.
Lines, right? Or words, if you want. And what else?
Int lines.
Int lines, correct?
But the words and lines gonna be integers?
Those aren't they? If I'm counting something,
Yes.
isn't that an integer?
Yes.
Now, what should be the initial value of these things?
0.
0. So you either later initialize them to 0, or at declaration time, you say int chars equals 0, semicolon.
Now, what if you never initialize them? What's going to happen?
Then it's arbitrary. Here's the problem. Many C compilers initialize it to 0. And people get sloppy with their C code. And they start assuming that that's a language feature. And then they get some very small embedded system compiler, okay, that's trying to minimize the size of the code that's got to fit in a little 2K chunk of ROM someplace. And it doesn't have this big opulent C runtime. It does exactly what you tell it to do based on what the language says. And then suddenly their code's breaking. They're going, I don't know what happened. And it takes hours and days and weeks to debug code. The only thing that gets initialized in C, according to the language standard, is a pointer. And it's initialized to null. Usually 0, but it doesn't have to be. It's initialized to 0, okay, to null rather. No other variables are initialized, although many C compilers do that for you. Many C compilers will deallocate memory when you allocate it. but they're not required to according to the language. So you know, you have to get, so good. So I need this input file pointer, I need chars, words, lines. Is there any other object that I'm using in there?
I know you said it was a.
Space?
Is
That's-
no.
What about that little C there?
See.
When you're saying while C is F gets C?
Yes, while C gets, F gets C. Turns out that has to be an int as well. An int as well. So, int C. So I need all of those objects to be declared up there. You see? Now I just said, declare the necessary variables.
But Dr. Morris, what does that C correspond to? What does that represent?
It represents the variable that's going to receive the result of the F get C function call.
So is that what we use? That's where we store the information, basically.
So F get C of stream, what do you suppose it does?
F gets C of string. It
File get character. So the F get C, and some of this stuff, if you don't understand, just, you know, man it up. F get C, and then this is the name of the file. What do you suppose it returns?
get C.
A character. The next, because what does word count do? It counts characters, words, and lines, doesn't it? So, how am I going to have to read the file? A character at a time. Read the next character, read the next character, read the next character. How do I know if it's a word?
'Cause
There's either going to be a space or a new line there or something, right? So you have to put some intelligence into thinking about it. Does that make sense?
yes.
Why don't you put C++ there as well? Because it has to move from one character to the other, right?
C is the thing that receives the input character from the file stream. It's a holder. That's all. Then, so while it's not end of file, what does that mean?
While there are still characters.
While there's still characters in the file, get one. And where do you put it?
And C.
Also,
Into the
it
object
initialized.
called C. Okay?
So it don't need to be initialized.
It doesn't, because the very first thing you do is put something into it.
It's just a storage space,
It's
right?
a storage space. So not only do we need to declare the necessary variables and initialize some of them, notably these three, okay? Then we also have to do what? Deal with command line arguments. How many command line arguments are there supposed to be?
3,
Look at it. How many are there supposed to be?
2.
2.
2 of them. If it's not 2, what do?
You close.
You go home. Sorry, wrong number of arguments. You're an idiot. Bye. Okay? Now, if it is 2, then it says open the file that's to be counted. Where is the file to be counted? Which one of these has the name of the file?
The first argument is 0.
argv of, no,
1.
that's the name of the function.
That's the name of the function, okay.
It's argv of 1.
Okay.
How do I open a file given a file pointer?
Star IF.
So I would go if, and what? IFP equals, how do I open a file?
It equals 0.
How do I open a file in C?
IFP.
F open.
Oh, yeah.
It's one of the fundamental operating system calls. You have to open a file. Okay, so F open. And it's shown in the other codes. If F open, and what's the name of the file that I'm going to open?
No. Argument 1.
Yes, argv of 1. Okay. I'm going to open argv of 1. What mode am I going to open it in? Read or write?
Read.
So I'm going to open it in read mode. Okay. So, boom, and close. Now, what if this fails? What's it going to return?
No.
A error message.
Close. It is an error, but if a file fails to open, what's the value of IFP?
See, no.
Equals null. see if we understand it. Okay? So first I checked to make sure that there was the right number, because what would happen if I tried to open argv1 and there wasn't an argv1?
It would be null, so the close,
We
right?
don't know what would happen. Depends on what's in the memory location where argv1 is supposed to be. If you were really lucky, and I use that sarcastically, then the thing that happens to be in the memory associated with argv1 would actually be a real file name. Okay, and you would open it and you'd start throwing out nonsense. Okay, so let's follow it through. So declare the variables. And do we agree that these are the variables that are needed?
Yes.
Yeah.
Now, of those variables, what's the next comment say? To initialize them.
So we have to set them at null.
So, in particular, would you say that these three have to be initialized?
Yes.
Because what do they represent?
Characters, words,
They
and lines.
represent counters
Yeah.
of characters, words, and lines. So, right now, before I started, how many characters have I found?
None.
0. How
Right.
many words have I found?
0.
And how many lines have I found?
0.
0. So I would initialize all of these guys to 0. I don't need to do anything with C. What's the purpose of this holder C?
It's just going to store the information that we get from
It's going to
line.
grab the next character out of the file. The next character, the next character, the next
That's
character.
only counting the character, right?
It's not counting it, it's just holding it.
So why does it int then?
Oh, good question, because end of file is an int. That's an excellent question, an often asked question. People say, why shouldn't it just be a char? Why shouldn't C be a char? And the answer is because in C, EOF is an int. Don't ask me, I didn't build the language,
So
okay?
EOF is sort of a function in C?
EOF is a pound sign define. End of file. The end of file marker in C requires a full int. And so it's commonplace in C to declare the object that holds the character. So what you end up having is a bunch of extra space up at the top that doesn't matter. All right.
Dr. Morris,
In an object, yes.
and int charge, right? In the characters. Now each time, I understand about the words and the lines because all that's going kind of like in a group.
Yes.
But it's a character. It's gonna read each character, and then when that character is stored in C, it just overwrites it, or
Yes, it overwrites it. We'll see. We haven't got to the point yet what we do with this.
Okay.
We're just trying to get to the point of the while loop.
Okay.
Okay? So now, how many command line arguments are there supposed to be?
2.
So how would you do that? We'll leave this here for the moment. How would I deal with how many command line arguments? Somebody help me out here.
Arg.
You see arg v0.
Well, 0. Arg
Well,
v
Command line. Oh,
How many of them?
2.
2.
How do I know that?
Because you have the one function, we're
Yes.
going to call it, and then
In
you get its
the
file.
C language, how do I express this
Oh.
question of are there the correct number of command line arguments? If, that's a good start. If what?
If arg v 0
No, it's not argv.
is arg 0.
No. Remember?
RCH.
Look at main. What are the two parameters to the main routine?
Oh.
There's
argc
and there's
argv,
argv.
right.
What is argc?
That's the arg v0.
Arg count. No, it's not argv0. Argc is the count. How many command line arguments are there? And their values are in argv.
So arg v
So it
contains
should
arg
be
v0 and arg
RC.
v1.
And RV2, or however many there are, yes. It
So-
contains all of them.
The argc is going to actually count how many arguments
Yes.
there is.
Yes, how many
Okay.
of them are there? So in this case, if I invoked it this way, what would argc be?
2.
2. Isn't that what I want? So what if I want to look for an error? What would I say?
If
Else?
R
If argc,
equals 2.
well,
Well,
how about does not equal?
it does
Okay.
not equal 2. Right. It's
Right?
It's not equal to.
If argc doesn't equal 2, then what?
Close.
You know,
Oh, error.
print
Print.
out you're a big dummy.
Yeah, print error.
Exit and go away.
Yeah.
Right?
Right.
Makes sense, doesn't it? All right? So this is a standard feature of operating systems to have command line arguments. So it's a fundamental thing that you ought to know how to do. So if R counts not 2, go away. Otherwise, when I come down here, what do I know?
That is 2.
That it has 2 command line arguments. All right, now what do I need to do according to this comment up here? I've declared the necessary variables. I've initialized those that make sense. Okay, then what else? I've dealt with command line arguments. Now what do I need to do?
Open the file.
Open the file. We've agreed that argv1 is the name of the file, and I assign this fopen to the IFP, which is the input file pointer, and it's a read-only mode. If this operating system call entitled fopen returns the value null, what does that mean?
It's not 2 arguments.
It didn't open the file. And if it didn't open the file, what do?
Like some error.
We say, can't open the file, bye.
Exit.
Okay? Make sense or no?
Yes.
All right. So now that we've got the file open, what do? The while loop. Now that the file's open, what are you going to start doing?
We start the...
One character at a time. Start pulling them out one character at a time. What are you going to do every time you get a character?
You're going to count it.
You're going to increment the character count. Ka-chunk, ka-chunk, ka-chunk. Right? What's the next thing you have to know?
If it's a...
What does word count give you? It gives you characters, words,
and
lines, right?
So we got to
So I
differentiate
need
between...
to know when a word occurs,
Wait.
right?
So if there's a
when
space...
does a word occur?
When there's a space?
When there's a space. There's a built-in C function called isSpace. IsSpace. So, if isSpace C, what does that mean?
That means it's a word. If there's a space, then it's a word. Right?
That means you're no longer in the word. Right?
Because you found a space.
If you found a space, you're no longer in the middle of a word.
Okay, all right.
In which case, what do I do?
Any word is false.
Increment?
In-word. Oh, wait a minute. Did we forget to declare something up here?
What?
Word.
In-word. There we go.
That's not a C function then?
Nope. So we need another int called in-word. Right? And what do you suppose it should be declared to initially?
0.
It should be initially declared to true, right?
So if there is...
You
if
have
it's
to
a,
assume that you're in the middle. You have to assume you're either not in the middle of a word or you are in the middle of a word. So let's assume that you are in the middle of a word. Okay? So you have to declare int, in-word, and then set it to be true, right? So you would go in-word gets true. Word gets true. So now,
but Dr. Morris, what there was no characters in count the when we count the characters? What when everything else stands to be true? Then it went into the
if
file.
there were no characters,
and there was no
immediately
characters.
you would hit end of file.
Okay.
If it were an empty file, immediately you'd hit end of file, and it would dutifully report 0, 0, 0. So bump the characters. Then, if it's a space, what does that mean?
It's a word.
Yeah, no, if it's a space,
it's true.
You're not in a word anymore. So you set in-word to be false. Look at the logic here. If is space of C, what does that mean? If it's a space, watch. H-E-L-L-O space. What does this mean when I bring this character in?
You're not in the word.
I'm not in a word anymore.
Okay, I get you.
So initially when I started here, I was in a word. Right? So I read in the H, here's cares. It was initially 0. I read in the H, I bumped it to a 1. I read in the E, bumped it to a 2. Read in the L, bumped it to a 3. Read in the L, bumped it to a 4. Read in the O, bumped it to a 5. Read in the space, bumped it to a 6, because it's still a character. Yes?
Yes.
And now what do I notice? If I'm no longer in the word.
So it begins
I
with
set in word to be false. Does that make sense?
yes, because it's gonna go to the next word and start counting.
It's gonna go to the next word. So I set it to in word to not false. Then notice what I say. Else if not in the word,
It's true.
then
Word equals true.
in word is true, and I bump the word count.
Yes,
Does that make sense?
true. Yeah, yeah,
Because it makes sense, right?
yes.
I bump the word count. Then the final one says, if is line, what does that mean?
You're in the line.
The end of a line. So that's all that stuff we looked at last time. Vertical tab, new line, form feed, carriage return, a bunch of things that could represent end of line. And if it's the end of line, what do? Bump the lines. And when it's all said and done, I close the file. How do I show the results?
You show it in the C.
Right? And what function do I use to show results in C? Printf. So I could do something like this. Printf. Printf, that's the operating system function call that allows you to display things, right? And what does it want as an argument?
Pairs, words, and lines.
Yes, so I would go something. Now, if you look at the way word count works, it doesn't give you any hints. It just throws out 3 numbers, doesn't it?
Yes.
Right? And what format are they in?
Yeah, so the words, so it should be like number of words equal to, and then you put,
No, that's not what word count does. Word count just goes 3971. It's up to you to figure out what they mean. So you would go %D,
Dot. No,
space, %D, space, %D, new line, quote, and what are the 3 arguments?
word, line, and
Characters,
words, and lines.
So, chars,
Word,
words,
lines.
lines, close. Thank you.
percentage D is basically for.
That's a format specifier.
Yes.
It's a format specifier. For each of these that it finds in this format string, it matches it up to an argument. This says, just give me an integer. %D. How do I match a string?
Percent S.
It's %S. How do I match a floating point?
Percent F.
%F. And so on and so forth.
Didn't think I remember,
Okay.
did you, Dr. Moore?
All right. So now, then you how do you close the file?
Uh-oh.
What? No, to close the file. Remember, the file's called IFP. If F open opens the file, how do you
Then
close? You
F close.
F close, right? And F close what?
Close IFP.
F close IFP. When? It closes the file, right? And then exit 0, meaning no errors. Okay, let's back up a little bit. So I'm still getting some really, I don't quite get it looks, so we'll back up just to here. Do this more slowly. So here's WD echo. So more slowly. So how does echo work?
It's gonna tell you, it's gonna print out the same file name or.
Whatever you give it. If I say echo stuff, whatever that stuff is going to get printed out.
No matter if that was ever initialized or not.
Doesn't matter. It interprets it. Now, what delimits each element? A space. In the Unix command line, spaces delimit arguments. So if I said echo, hi guys. How many total command line arguments are there?
2.
Well,
One.
this is a bit of an ambiguity in C.
4.
Well, there's really 3 of them. This one is what?
The function.
This one's argv of 0. This one is what?
Argv of 1.
Argv of 1. And this one is argv of 2. What's argc?
The space, the holding
How
space.
many?
Oh, that's a counter.
3.
There's 3 of them. You see it?
Dr. Moore, so is echo, can echo be safely said it's just a copy
It's
of?
the name of the function. Yeah, echo says spit it back out. So let me back up. Wow. There are some examples of the commands that we will use. Notice on the very top it says echo. Now, by putting it in quotes, it ignores the space. So look at the top left in the top left window. Do you see it says echo? Quote, hello class, quote. So in this example, there's the echo command itself, and then there's its single argument. Okay, so it prints out, notice what it prints out.
Hello, class.
Hello class, it just echoes it to the screen, right? All right. So we're going to mimic that behavior. So here we go. So notice I'm using command line arguments, line 8. What does argc tell you?
It's a counter, it's
The
counting.
number of command line arguments, including the function itself. Okay? And what's argv? It's an array of the arguments. What's argv of 0? The function itself. What's argv of 1? The first command line
Right,
argument.
okay.
argv of 2 is the second
Second one.
command. What format do they have? They're strings. They're strings. So let's look at it. Does the echo command echo itself?
It does.
No. If I said echo hello world, it doesn't print out echo hello world.
No.
It only prints out
Hello.
hello world. So what's the first command line argument that gets printed out?
Hello.
argv of
1.
1. So look at the loop. I go from I equal 1 to less than argv, incrementing I, and then I print it out as a string argv of I. And all the space does is it puts spaces between it, if necessary. So it's a little nuance. So, bam. So if I compile it like shown on line 3, GCC wd echo.c -o3 wall -owd echo